A former Navy SEAL battles her past while taking down a dangerous hate group leader. With justice on the line, can she expose the truth before it's too late? Watch the fight unfold. The late afternoon sun spilled golden light across Maplewood Park, painting soft hues on the trees and casting long shadows over the faded walking path. Birds chirped lazily, and the distant laughter of children echoed from the playground swings. On a weathered bench near the edge of a quiet pond, Morgan Ellis sat alone, trying, just for a moment, to feel peace. She looked to be in her mid-30s, with a quiet strength in the way her shoulders held firm beneath a faded gray T-shirt. A leather jacket lay folded beside her. Her jeans were warm but sturdy, and a faint scar etched down her forearm, catching the light. That scar, like so many others, had stories no one dared to ask about. Once a Navy SEAL, Morgan had seen the worst the world had to offer. But here, she just wanted to breathe. She sipped lukewarm coffee from a paper cup, her dark eyes scanning the park. Not from paranoia, but habit. She noticed everything. The couple arguing quietly near a tree, the runner whose gait favored an old knee injury, and then them, for men, standing too still near the old oak, watching. They didn't belong here, not by their clothes, their posture, or the hate simmering just beneath their laughter. Morgan felt it before they even moved. It was a sharp edge of intent, the way predators circle prey before the pounce. "Afternoon, ma'am," one said, stepping forward. He was tall, wiry mid-40s with patchy facial hair and a look that tried too hard to seem harmless. "Mighty nice day, huh?" Morgan didn't flinch. She slowly turned her head, her expression calm but unwelcoming. "It was," she said coolly. The others laughed, one cracking his knuckles. "You here all alone?" another asked, voice laced with mock curiosity. Morgan stood. Her stance didn't threaten, but it didn't yield either. "What do you want?" Their leader, a broad man called Rex, grinned like he already owned the outcome. "Relax. We're just being friendly. Ain't nothing wrong with that, right?" Morgan met his stare, the steel in her voice unmistakable. "Walk away." For a beat, they hesitated. Something in her tone, maybe the way she didn't back down. But pride and ignorance are dangerous fuel. And soon, the line would be crossed. Morgan's boots pressed into gravel as she took one slow step forward. The air had shifted. Gone was the lazy calm of the park. It had been replaced with something electric, dangerous. The kind of quiet before a storm breaks. "You really want to go down this road?" she asked, her voice low, measured. "Because once we start, there's no walking it back." The men didn't answer, at least not with words. One of the younger ones, maybe barely out of his 20s, darted toward her. He moved fast, fists clenched, teeth bare like a street dog convinced it had the upper hand. Morgan stepped aside, her motion smooth as water. Her arm swung, clipped his shoulder, and sent him sprawling into the dirt with a grunt. No excess force, just enough to let him know she wasn't playing. "You're going to regret that," snarled Rex, his boots crunching closer. He motioned, and another man lunged, this one more calculated, arms raised in a boxer's stance. Morgan ducked under the first jab, twisted, and caught his wrist, using his own weight to send him over her hip. He slammed into the ground with a wheeze, dust rising from the impact. Pain flared in Morgan's ribs. She hadn't blocked the second swing fast enough. One of them had gotten in a lucky hit. She staggered back a step, but didn't fall. Years of combat had taught her to absorb pain, redirect it, survive it. "You fight like a man." Patchy beard spat from the ground, wiping blood from his lip. Morgan's eyes flashed, not with anger, but with something deeper, disgust. "I fight like someone who's already bled for this country. And I won't bleed for cowards like you." Rex took another step, but the sharp wail of sirens cut through the tension like a blade. The sound of spinning tires and gravel gave way to flashing lights at the park's entrance. The gang froze. Sirens changed things. They were wolves, but not brave ones. "You lucky today," Rex growled, backing away. "No," Morgan said, holding his gaze. "I'm just getting started." Morgan stared down the alleyway, the city's lights flickering behind her like a warning. The warehouse on Fletcher Street loomed ahead, just as the guy at the bar had said. Broken windows, rusted siding, and a faint hum of voices leaking from within. It wasn't just a hideout. It was a nest. She crouched behind a dumpster, heart steady, breath controlled. Her Navy SEAL instincts were kicking in now, sharpening her senses like a knife's edge. She counted the shadows. 5 bodies. Maybe 6. One of them was Tank. She could feel it. Inside, laughter echoed, low and taunting. "I told you," Tank's voice growled from the far end. "No more park jobs until I say so. We lay low or we go down." Morgan moved fast, silent as a ghost. She slipped through the side door, boot steps landing like whispers. Her Glock stayed holstered. She wasn't here to kill. Not yet. She pressed up against a wall of crates, inching closer to the source of the voices. She heard them arguing, the tension mounting. "Let them ask questions," Tank barked. "We don't fold." Suddenly, the back exit creaked open. One of the younger guys, Nate, she remembered, bolted through it, head down, eyes wide with panic. Wrong move. Morgan intercepted him mid-stride, snatching his arm and twisting it behind his back. The momentum threw him off balance, and she drove him down to one knee. "Leaving already?" she whispered, her voice cold steel. "You boys throw punches better than you run." "Let me go," he hissed. "Sure," she said, smirking. "But the cops outside might want a word first." Sirens wailed in the distance again, this time closer, closing in. Inside, Tank and the others stirred. "Who's out there?" he snapped, grabbing a crowbar. Morgan stood in the doorway now, eyes locked on Tank. The cops were coming. He had maybe 60 seconds of freedom left. "You should have picked someone else to mess with," she called out. Tank froze. Recognition dawned, and with it, fear. "You," he muttered. "Yeah," Morgan replied. "Me." The sound of police boots hitting pavement echoed like a countdown. The warehouse erupted in chaos. Red and blue lights sliced through the night as police cruisers skidded to a stop outside. The screech of tires, slamming of doors, and shouting officers filled the air like thunder before a storm. Inside, Morgan had Nate pinned against a concrete wall, one hand gripping his wrist, the other flat against his back. His breath came in fast, panicked gulps. "You hear that?" she murmured. "That's your freedom slipping away." "I didn't sign up for this," he cried. "You signed up the second you followed Tank." Before he could respond, the front doors burst open. Riot shields, flashlights, officers flooding the room like a tidal wave. The rest of Tank's crew scattered, some diving behind crates, others raising their hands instinctively. But not Tank. Tank didn't run. He stood dead center in the chaos, jaw tight, crowbar still gripped in his hand. His eyes found Morgan. "This ain't over," he snarled, voice low, cracking with rage. Morgan released Nate, shoving him toward the cops. She moved into the open floor, boots echoing against concrete, her figure lit by the strobe of police lights pouring in through shattered windows. "It is for you," she said calmly. Tank roared and charged. For a moment, the world slowed. She pivoted, sidestepped. The crowbar missed her face by an inch. She ducked, spun, and landed a solid punch to his ribs. He staggered, but didn't fall. His swing came again, wild and reckless. This time, Morgan caught his arm mid-swing, twisted it, and slammed him to the floor. The crowbar clanged against the concrete. Tank groaned, his breath knocked out of him. "You're not so tough when you're alone," she said, crouching beside him, her voice like a quiet storm. "And you picked the wrong war." Handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists as Officer Reyes appeared behind her. "We've got the others secured. This one's going away for a long time." Tank sneered through gritted teeth. "You think this ends with me?" Morgan rose slowly, brushing dust from her jeans. "No," she replied. "I think this is where it begins." Outside, the night air was cool against her sweat-damp skin. The building behind her buzzed with voices, flashlights, and the sharp scent of justice. She didn't smile, but her eyes held the fire of a woman who had just flipped the game on its head. The cold glow of the interrogation room buzzed from the overhead fluorescent light, casting sharp shadows across the metal table. Morgan stood just beyond the two-way mirror, arms crossed, Her eyes fixed on a man inside, Ray Patch Delaney, the wiry, twitchy member of Tank's crew, who had folded faster than a cheap lawn chair when the cuffs went on. Officer Reyes joined her, a thin folder in hand. He's been sitting there for 20 minutes, sweating like a thief in church. You want to take a crack at him? Morgan didn't move her gaze. He'll talk. They always do once the adrenaline crashes. She stepped into the room like a storm rolling in over calm waters. Patch flinched the second the door closed behind her. His eyes darted around like a trapped animal, looking for an exit that didn't exist. "Relax," Morgan said, pulling out the chair and sitting across from him. "I'm not here to hurt you." Patch gave a bitter chuckle. "You already did." Morgan tilted her head. That was restraint. His smirk faded. He rubbed the side of his face where a bruise had started to form. "You've got a decision to make," Morgan continued. "Take the fall with Tank, or help us bring down the man who really runs the circus." Patch blinked. "Hendrick." Morgan nodded once. "Tell me what you know, and maybe you walk out with some dignity." Patch hesitated, then leaned forward. "He never met us directly. It was all through drops, envelopes, burner phones. The money came from his shell companies, construction, logistics, even a fake nonprofit. He wanted chaos. Said it kept people scared, made them easier to control. Tank was just a face." Morgan's fists clenched under the table. "And the others?" Patch swallowed. 3 other crews. Different states. Same orders. We weren't alone. Outside, Reyes was already dialing the feds. As Morgan stood to leave, Patch called after her. "You think you're going to stop all of this? One woman?" Morgan glanced back, a fire burning in her eyes. "I don't need to stop all of it. I just need to make the first one fall." The night air hung thick over the east side of Marlow City's industrial district. Abandoned warehouses loomed like forgotten giants, their rusted metal frames creaking in the breeze. Morgan crouched behind a stack of pallets across the street, her eyes fixed on a squat brick building with a flickering security light. This was it, Fletcher Street. Patch had spilled the location before his lawyer could even get him a cup of water. She adjusted the small earpiece in her right ear. "Reyes, I've got eyes on the building. No signs of movement yet. But I don't like how quiet it is." His voice crackled through. "Backup's 5 minutes out. You sure you don't want to wait?" "I'm not here to play safe," she muttered, already moving toward the side entrance. Morgan slipped inside through a broken panel near the loading dock. The interior smelled of dust, oil, and the stale stench of sweat. She moved like smoke, silent, shifting through the shadows. Then she heard it, muffled voices, low and angry. She followed the sound through a hallway of stacked crates, each one marked with the name of a Hendrick Front company. "Think the cops are still sniffing around?" someone said. Tank's voice answered, unmistakable. "Doesn't matter. We lay low. No phones. No contact." Morgan edged closer, peeking around the corner. 5 men. Tank, 2 of his muscleheads, and 2 others she didn't recognize, probably from one of the other crews. They were all armed, but lazy about it, their weapons slung loose or resting nearby. She reached into her jacket, fingers brushing against the cold steel of her sidearm. But then she paused. No, too easy. She needed them to talk, to confirm what Patch had said. She slid her phone from her pocket and hit record. Suddenly, her boot scraped a loose screw. Metal on concrete. "What was that?" one of them barked. Morgan didn't run. She stood tall, stepping into the light, looking for someone. Tank's eyes widened. "You." Before anyone could move, the front doors exploded open. Reyes and his team stormed in like thunder, floodlights sweeping the room. Down on the ground, hands where we can see him. In the chaos, Morgan locked eyes with Tank as he reached for his weapon, but froze when he saw her aim square at his chest. The moment passed. His hands went up. "Smart choice," Morgan said coldly. The interrogation room was dimly lit, humming with the low buzz of a dying fluorescent bulb overhead. Morgan leaned against the back wall, arms crossed, watching through the observation window. Inside, Tank sat hunched at the metal table, hands cuffed, a scowl frozen on his face. The bravado he'd worn like armor the night before it cracked. Now, he just looked tired. Detective Reyes stood beside her, flipping through a thin manila file. He's not talking, playing tough. Morgan's eyes narrowed. He'll talk to me. Reyes hesitated. You sure? He knows who you are now. He'll poke every button you've got. Morgan pushed off the wall. Let him try. Inside the room, the door shut behind her with a heavy clang. Tank didn't look up. Took you long enough, he muttered. Morgan pulled the chair out and sat across from him, her voice low and sharp. This ends one of two ways. You cooperate and walk away with some piece of your future, or you keep playing tough and go down with the rest of this racist trash heap. He laughed, bitter and defiant. You think you won something? Morgan slid a photo across the table. An image of Tank standing shoulder to shoulder with a clean-cut man in a tailored suit. That's Paul Hendrick, right? Your puppet master? Tank's jaw tightened. You weren't just running some redneck fight club in the park. This was coordinated, organized, funded, and you were the enforcer. I don't know what you're talking about. Morgan leaned in, her tone cold. We've got audio, video, financials, witnesses. You're not protecting a brotherhood. You're covering for a man who used you like a weapon. Hendrick's the real threat, and you're the idiot he throws to the wolves. Tank's eyes flickered. You know I'm right, she said. And here's the part that should really piss you off. Hendrick thinks you're expendable. You talk, we take him down. You stay quiet, and you take the fall for all of it. A long pause. Finally, Tank exhaled through his nose, shaking his head. He's been using the construction businesses. Money laundering. Coded transfers. I don't know everything, but I know where the files are. Morgan's expression didn't change, but her jaw unclenched slightly. Good, she said, because now we go after the king. The sun was beginning to set behind the skyline as Morgan stood outside the sleek glass headquarters of Hendrick Development Group. The building towered over the city like a monument to money. Clean lines, steel edges, spotless image. But Morgan knew better. Behind the polished facade was rot. She adjusted her earpiece, hearing Reyes in her ear. We got teams at every entrance. No one in, no one out. Copy, she murmured, stepping to the revolving doors like she belonged there. The lobby smelled like lemon polish and corporate arrogance. A security guard glanced up from behind the front desk, but barely looked at her. She flashed the forged ID Sarah had whipped up earlier that day. Building safety inspector. The guard gave a bored nod. Elevators to your left. Morgan smiled tightly. Thanks. As she rode up to the top floor, her heart beat steadily. Not with fear, but anticipation. This was Hendrick's castle. If he had records, if he had connections, they'd be here. And with Tank finally flipping, the noose had already started tightening. The elevator dinged. The hallway beyond was quiet, lined with frosted glass offices and framed awards that meant nothing to her. She moved fast, counting doors, scanning for the nameplate she had memorized from Rhea's briefing. Paul Hendrick, executive director. Morgan drew a slim black tool from her jacket and picked the lock. Within seconds, the door clicked open. She slipped inside. The room was pristine, modern, sterile. A massive desk sat in the center, and behind it, a locked cabinet. Her phone buzzed. Sarah, I'm in, Morgan whispered. Good. Look for anything marked with a non-profit shell accounts. Eastbridge Initiative, Unity Forward, Citizens for Renewal. Morgan knelt by the cabinet and worked the lock. It popped. Inside were rows of binders, flash drives, and envelopes labeled with coded titles. She stuffed the files into her satchel. Got it. But just as she stood, the door creaked open. You lost? A deep voice asked. Morgan turned slowly. A man in a fitted suit stood in the doorway. Not Hendrick, one of his lieutenants. I was just leaving, she said, calm as ever. He stepped forward. Not before I find out who you really are. Morgan didn't hesitate. She lunged, striking fast, a sharp elbow to ribs, a palm strike to throat. The man dropped with a grunt. She bolted for the elevator. Rhea's already shouting in her earpiece. Team Alpha, move in now. As the SWAT team breached the building from the rear, Morgan emerged through the side exit, breathless but triumphant, the satchel tight in her grip. They had what they needed, and Hendrick's empire had just started to crack. Morgan sat in the precinct's war room, surrounded by whiteboards cluttered with maps, names, and pinned photographs. The buzz of police chatter echoed faintly from the hallway, but inside, the air was thick with tension and determination. Across the table, Sarah tapped her pen against her notepad, scrolling through digital documents as Reyes and his team reviewed the evidence pulled from Hendrick's office. The files, bank statements, communication logs, and donor lists had painted a devastating picture. For the first time, they had something solid, but it still wasn't enough. Morgan leaned back in her chair, exhausted. Her knuckles were scraped, her ribs sore. The last few days had taken a toll, not just physically, but emotionally. Every piece of evidence brought her closer to justice, but also unearthed more of the poison buried deep in the community she once believed in. Reyes looked up, his eyes tired but steady. We've got the money trail. Hendrick's companies funneled funds to Tank's crew and at least 3 other known hate groups. But the defense is going to say it's all circumstantial. We need a human element, something the jury can feel. Morgan's jaw tightened. Then we give them one. She opened her satchel and pulled out her statement, her personal account, names, dates, what Tank said, what she endured. I'll testify, she said. I'll stand in that courtroom and tell them what it feels like to be hunted in your own neighborhood, to be chosen as a target just because you don't fit their image of belonging. Sarah's eyes softened. Are you sure? Once you do that, you can't go back to anonymity. Morgan nodded. I'm not here to hide. I'm here to finish what they started. As the team gathered around, the atmosphere shifted. This wasn't just a takedown anymore. It was a reckoning, not just for Hendrick, but for every system that allowed him to operate unchecked. And in that moment, Morgan realized something powerful. Justice isn't about vengeance. It's about truth, about dragging the ugliness into the light and daring it to hide. She looked around the room, Reyes, Sarah, the young officers taking notes, and said quietly, if we don't stand up now, when do we? No one had an answer, but everyone understood. The courtroom was packed. Reporters lined the back wall, their cameras silent but ready. Friends, community leaders, off-duty officers, and survivors of past attacks filled the pews. On the far right, Morgan sat with Sarah, her jaw clenched, her gaze unwavering. At the prosecution's table, Reyes reviewed his notes one final time. Paul Hendrick sat in the defendant's chair, impeccably dressed, his face unreadable. But beneath the mask of composure, the cracks were showing. Faint lines of stress at his temples, a nervous twitch in his jaw. He knew the walls had closed in. All rise, the bailiff called. Morgan stood, her heartbeat a slow, steady drum in her ears. This wasn't just the end of the case. It was the end of a chapter in a fight she didn't ask for, but refused to run from. The foreperson rose, holding the slip of paper that would change everything. In the case of the state versus Paul Hendrick, we find the defendant guilty on all counts. The courtroom exhaled. Hendrick sat still as if frozen, the verdict striking him harder than any headline ever could. Around him, murmurs filled the air, some relieved, others stunned. But to Morgan, it all faded into background noise. Later, outside the courthouse, the sunlight broke through the clouds. Sarah handed Morgan a bottle of water. You did it, she said softly. Morgan shook her head. No, we did. Reyes, you, the people who came forward, and every name on that wall inside the precinct. She looked across the courthouse steps where a group of high schoolers had gathered, holding signs that read, Justice Matters and Hate Has No Home Here. That's when it hit her. This was never just about taking Hendrick down, she said, her voice steady. It was about making sure people like him never rise again unnoticed, about proving that silence is no longer an option. Sarah smiled. So what now? Morgan glanced at the reporters still hovering near the sidewalk. Now we keep going. We teach, we speak, we protect. Because justice isn't a finish line, it's a choice. One we have to make every single day. And with that, Morgan Blake walked down those steps, not just as a survivor or a fighter, but as a symbol of what happens when strength meets purpose.